I'm really excited for our next discussion. The topic that we're going to be digging into is the economic case for deeper public investments in childcare. I'm so thrilled to welcome City Controller Brad Lander and Richard Bury, the CEO of Robinhood. Wherever you like. Thank you both so much for being here.
I thought when you switched jobs, I wouldn't have to be in.
That's Brad's. Well, that could be both of your lines. Yeah, exactly.
I'm never getting away from Grace. That's what I've concluded about New York City. So.
So we all got to know each other, through my work in a prior life as a journalist covering New York politics, and. But it has been amazing to collaborate and work with you in my new role and capacity. And Rich, I just want to thank Robinhood and you in particular for all the support that you've given to Five Borough, which has made today happen. So thank you for your belief in this conversation. So both of you bring incredibly rich history to this discussion. You have played roles inside government, outside government. Rich also, before he went into City Hall as a deputy mayor, led an operator of early childhood programs. And so we're really looking through this conversation to kind of bridge what we heard from the last panel, which did include more solutions than just problems, but sort of we've definitely identified the problem, bridging more to a solutions focus. And City Controller, I want to start with you. Your office put out a major report earlier this year on childcare, the potential benefits of greater public investments. What are the key takeaways from that report that's important for this audience to know?
Well, first of all, it's so great to be here. Let's say a big thank you to Grace and Five Borough for this work, to Tom and Emmy and everyone who's put this together. An honor to be here with all of you. So many people central to this sector, to this issue. Great to have the governor here. And then really great to be on this panel with Rich, who at Children's Aid in building out UPK in the de Blasio administration, and now in his leadership at Robinhood is just like a hero of New York City. So it's really an honor to get to do this with you. I'm going to start just because a couple of the takeaways of the report were just a further illumination of the problem. So we'll get to kind of the case and the benefits. And shout out to Krista Olson and Laura Lai from my office who did a lot of work on this report. But a few numbers here. So if you look from 2019 to 2024, and not that everything was great in 2019, but if you look over the 5-year period from 2019 to 2024, as we're coming out of the pandemic, there was some growth in hourly earnings for New Yorkers, average of 13% over 5 years. Not terrible, except that inflation during that time was 20%. Housing costs during that time went up about 35%. The average cost of center-based childcare during that time went up 43%, and the average cost of home-based or family daycare, which of course what most twos are in, went up 79% over those 5 years. So that's where people's income is going. They're getting a little more, but it's flowing out dramatically to all kinds of things, groceries and energy and transportation, but especially to housing and especially to childcare. Those costs for family care, average of $18,200, and for center-based care, an average of $26,000, as you've heard. Now, we also looked at the workforce because there's about 35,000 daycare workers in New York City. Their average annual income is $25,000, and I just told you that the price for them to have one of their kids in a center is $26,000. Impossible. If you use the calculation that the federal government uses, we're more familiar with this in housing, where you're supposed to pay, it's affordable if you pay 30% of your income for rent. On childcare, it's affordable if you pay 7% of your income for childcare. You would need an income, a family would need an income to pay the average cost of $334,000 to find childcare affordable in New York City. So that's what you're hearing, whether you are yourself a low-wage worker providing childcare or a tech worker or two, you still can't afford it. So that's a bunch of the data that we looked at. So that's sort of part one of the case, and I'll stop there. Fortunately, we also looked at, okay, so if we make the public investment, what are the benefits?
So Rich, I'll pull you in. As Brad said, you led really the rollout of universal pre-K in New York City in the de Blasio administration, but also, as a journalist covering the former mayor, I tell people now that what was so striking about universal pre-K was it was priority 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the new mayor, and it seemed to take sort of the full force and focus of the administration to get something done on that scale with the speed that you all did. So as we talk, and we just heard the governor say, she believes New York can be on a path to universal childcare, but obviously there's some big hurdles. How does government, what are the lessons you learned and take away from UPK that we should be thinking about in the context of putting us on this path to universal childcare in New York?
Well, thank you. First of all, let me just also thank you, Grace, for having us, and looking at Emmy, who was a big part of that pre-K for all team, and other people in this room. So thank you for being here, and thank you for such kind words. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. So maybe sort of say two things. One is just to reiterate, I think what we've heard, and that prior panel, I just want to thank you. It was a really amazing panel. It was really great to hear those perspectives. I would just reiterate, as we heard in the last panel, as we heard from you, this is of course a challenge of poor and working people, but it is truly a challenge for all New Yorkers. One of the things that, another way we look at the data is at Robin Hood, we partner with Columbia to publish something called the Poverty Tracker, which is looking at the experience of poverty of New Yorkers. And what we see is, one is that the poverty line, using the supplemental poverty measure, which measures the cost of living, as you described, Brad, part of what's happening is that it's not that incomes aren't growing, it's that the cost of living is growing so much that even the poverty line is growing disproportionately. 7.5% at the last time our data lags a year, compared to 3% in prior years. So that it's for a family of four about $47,000. Just to reiterate that this is part of what's driving this is a set of costs of which child care and housing are at the center. But also I think important for this conversation is that when we survey New Yorkers, what we find is that we're asking them about the experience of poverty, but we're also asking New Yorkers about what we call material hardship, which just sort of summarizes just the challenges of paying your bills. Trying to choose between, are you worried about running out of food before the end of the month? Are you juggling bills? And what we find is that even if you are living at 300% of the poverty line, your experience of material hardship is very similar to a person who's living in poverty. And I don't want to discount the relative challenges of being poor and not being poor. But again, it's interesting how you can come to the same problem in different ways. If you're earning $150,000 a year, you are struggling to make ends meet in this city, which is why I think the idea of universal child care is so resonant in this campaign, and why I think the idea of pre-K for all was so resonant in the de Blasio's campaign for mayor. So in terms of what you just said, I mean, I think you answered the question. I mean, my message is childcare for all possible? It's absolutely possible. Anything's possible with the resources and the will. But I would not understate or underestimate the operational complexity of doing so. Pre-K for all, we stood that up in about 18 months, adding essentially 50,000 full-day seats in 4 months. Was a challenge of resources, of course. It was a challenge of real estate. It was a challenge of licensing and permitting. It was a human capital challenge. It was a challenge of outreach and community engagement. It was an outreach of curriculum and coaching and training. It is a program where, although the school system and ACS were at the heart of it, there are at least a dozen agencies that I would say played a critical role in its operation. And all of that was possible because it was mayor's, as you say, top priority. That was very clear. And what that meant is that we could organize effectively all those parts of city government to knock down all the problems that stood in the way of that program coming to bear. And I will say it's not part of this conversation, but as a side note, it's why one thing that I'm very concerned about is the fight for mayoral control, because although child care is not necessarily a program of the school system, it's silly to think that there's a disconnect somehow between the systems of care for 1 and 2 year olds and the systems of care for 3 and 4 year olds. And how you would organize that whole of government approach without clear management authority of the school system, I think would be beyond impossible. So I'm happy to go into any more of that, but I would say that I think, and I heard the last part of the governor's remarks, eligibility is important, funding is important. Knocking those two things down would be critical wins. But the operational complexity of engaging New York City's vast child care sector to actually stand up quality seats in the places where families need them is a massive undertaking. We should not underestimate how challenging that will be and how that could potentially crowd out. Because the thing about a priority that you can't have 10 of them, we should also understand that necessarily means what are we going to prioritize over, and making sure that we are actually driving resources and attention to the things that matter most. And I agree that childcare and housing are the two things that are most essential to not only for poor and working New Yorkers, but just to our economic viability of our city, to us being the kind of city that we want to live in, with artists and musicians and tech companies and all the things that make this city so great. Solving this problem is critical, but then let's actually be serious about solving the problem.
Thank you. Brad, we heard the governor talk about, the economic headwinds, the budget challenges that the city and state are facing from Washington. Given that backdrop and the findings of your report, I mean, how are you thinking about this financially? Obviously, it would be a significant investment of public resources. It's not something that is necessarily going to happen overnight by any stretch, but even a phased-in approach. How should we, in your eyes, be thinking about this from a financial standpoint?
So let me break this down a little. You heard the governor say that the cost of statewide universal child care that she estimates at $14 billion, and that is a lot of money and sounds like a lot of money. But if we break it down, I think we can see some really clear ways forward. So first, it's worth noting, in New York City, we currently spend about $4 billion, about half of that city tax levy. We're the only city in the country spending $2 billion out of our $115 billion budget of tax levy money on childcare. The other $2 billion, a mix of state and federal funds. That gets us universal pre-K, a lot, though not quite universal 3K, and a bunch of vouchers for 0 to 3. The 2Care program that New Yorkers United for Childcare is costing, with pay parity at full implementation, would be $1.7 billion for New York City, so that's not statewide. We could share it with them. Expanding 3K to meet estimated seat need to get it to truly universal with pay parity for those providers, another $486 million. Making 3K and pre-K full day and full year really important. Kind of silly for us to go off the outdated model of school hours as we're building out 3K and pre-K. Like, we already know parents don't whatever. We're in a different economy than we were, and the idea of picking them up at 3 and everybody being off for the summer doesn't work. So full year round and full day, full year, another $872 million, and extending pay parity to early learn and vouchers so that the providers are getting paid decently, another $141 million. All of that would add up to $3.2 billion, which is not nothing, but is also not $14 billion. And I'm not saying every penny of that has to come from the state, but that would be an awfully big step forward. So for $3.2 billion, we could have full pre-K, full 3K, full 2Care, full day, full year, and pay parity. Who thinks that's worth $3.2 billion? And then in terms of the benefits, that's worth in the pockets of families about $2 billion that they, of course, will be spending in the economy and then their neighborhoods. It will save about $900 million for employers who are losing to productivity and absenteeism and increased turnover. And this goes to the ability of companies to recruit in New York City, because if you are losing those young families right at the moment that they're having kids, that their housing needs are expanding, and they are, despite somehow, and I mean, this is to all parents, but especially moms who are somehow still at their peak economic productivity, like creating in all of the ways our companies most need in those working years, what it means to have companies not be able to locate here because families are fleeing. And let's be clear, families are fleeing. The population of kids under 3 dropped by 19% over that same time period I gave you. We're not losing families without children. If you look at the data, what we are losing is families with children clobbered by the combination of growing housing costs and child care costs at just the moment we most need them in the workforce. And I'm a housing guy. I've been a housing guy my whole life. We absolutely need to invest in more affordable housing for the long term of this city. But sadly, you can't deploy housing affordability that quickly. So if you give me $3.2 billion, I could build some housing, and over time that would help some families. But though, if you were to ask me, how could we deploy it to rapidly achieve something that provides affordability for those families right now, childcare is how we do it.
Can I follow up on that?
Yes.
And just to add a thought, part of the framework is childcare as an economic tool for families to work. That's powerful. There's not only the positive case that you're making, but also it's important to remember what is lost when we don't have childcare. Tens of billions of dollars in lost economic activity for parents who are downsizing their hours because they don't have access to the workforce. It is both a positive good for growth, but what's always lost in these conversations is what are the hidden costs of what we don't have now? But I'll also say that childcare is not only an important economic tool for working parents, it is also an educational and developmental tool. It is not like brains don't start learning at age 4 or 5 or 3 or 2.5. With so much brain activity and development happening, it has lifelong impacts. We know research after research show that the earliest interventions of quality early education have massive multi-generational impacts. That is true for babies, it's true for 1-year-olds. And so childcare is not only about childcare, it's about providing meaningful developmental experiences for young people, which is why pay parity is so important. For all the obvious reasons, both to have because a stressed child care worker is not a child care worker who is available for the children in their care the way you need them to be. It's why training is so important. It's why curriculum is so important. Coaching and oversight is so important. And so again, I think when we thought about the pre-K experience, we were focused not only on building seats, but what would it take to make sure that the children in those seats were having positive educational experiences? What does curriculum look like? What does training look like? What does coaching look like? What does oversight look like? And so I just want to make sure that the economic argument is a winner on its own, but this is also about human development.
Can I underline one thing here? Because I think this is an important part of the 2Care program, because a whole lot more of the care for 2-year-olds is provided in home-based, or what's sometimes called family daycare, which is a pretty different setting from a center, and where we haven't yet. There are some wonderful networks. There is some support for those providers, but nothing like what we would need to do high-quality universal 2Care. So I just think that's really an important thing to focus on. It's going to need to be a somewhat different model of professional development, because you're not in a center with a staff and a team. Some of those folks are represented by UFT. So there's a set of questions that we're going to engage with, but they're critical for two reasons, both because if you want that to be nurturing and high quality, then it's critical to invest in professional development, and to come back to the fact that those people are doing some of the most important work. I'm pretty sure if you reordered our economic priorities by asking people what they would pay the most for, putting their 2-year-olds in the hands of folks they would pay a super high premium for relative to, I don't know, day trading or, one of the other things that we compensate very differently. So at a minimum, as we're expanding, we have to recognize that's a part of the system that needs to be paid adequately and needs the professional development to support all our
This
kids.
is a workforce. It is women. It is black. It is Latino. It's why we don't pay people what they deserve.
Yeah.
And the good news about quality is that those networks, those models exist. To invest in them, to bring them anywhere approaching the scale of what the system needs is a whole other story. But we don't have to start from scratch in building those models. We fund some great networks of family care providers that are doing amazing work. So the models exist to build on, but we do have to build that capacity.
And just to build a little further on, I mean, yes, it has been underpaid because it is historically women of color. At the moment, let's remember also overwhelmingly and increasingly immigrant. And I think it's just worth connecting the dots here of what kind of city we're talking about, where we act as though sometimes that work to protect our immigrant neighbors is in a different part of our brain than economic justice and equality. But let's remember, New York City today is 40% foreign born. 50% of New Yorkers live in mixed status households with at least one immigrant in their family, including 1 million children. So that's a lot of the kids we're talking about. It's a lot of the providers that we're talking about. That's the economic future of our city. But it's also that panel we had up here before, when Jan Gutierrez talks about the fact that so many babies are born to moms in the city council. That's because it's taken us this long to make it possible for young women and women of color to lead their communities, which it should not have taken this long, but we're getting there. What we can do if we lean forward is keep it going.
So, Rich, I want to ask you, Robinhood obviously does a lot of work with business leaders, engaging them in helping to solve and invest in solutions to help low-income New Yorkers and alleviate poverty. We heard Julie Samuels from Tech NYC talk about sort of, her suggested strategies for making noise if you are an employee trying to get the attention of the C-suite on this issue. What's your advice for all of us in terms of how to most effectively engage business leaders on childcare?
Well, I think Julie's advice was right. I can say that in the pre-K for all battle, the political battle that gets funding, business leaders were a critical part of that battle. That was true also for the fight to expand statewide support for childcare vouchers. I think having business leaders at the table to make the case is critical. And it really is at heart about making clear that just like transportation is critical infrastructure for business, just like public safety is critical infrastructure, just like education, housing or infrastructure, childcare is critical infrastructure. So I think making the case in business terms to business leaders and then having business voices be a part of the coalition who all have an interest, and just like they care about the quality of our police force, really should care about the quality of our childcare. So I can say that it was absolutely a critical part of the political coalition in both those campaigns, and will need to be, particularly given the money we're talking about, but also the choice. I keep coming back to this. The choices that I think we're going to have to make of the city once it comes time to actually make these promises real, and just how vital it is that we actually do this right. Because I think I go back to so many people, including many times me, who did not believe we could pull pre-K off. So I'll put myself in that list of skeptics. But so much of what sometimes felt like hostility to the program was really just a lack of faith in the ability of government, particularly a progressive mayor, to do big thing that delivered real, meaningful results for people. This is another risk moment. So I think investing in childcare is important for all the reasons that we said, and delivering is important, but it's also important because we don't want this to become an excuse that people use in the future for why government is a failed enterprise and why for local government that is ambitious about meeting the needs of poor and working people is a failed enterprise. So I think engaging business leaders in that conversation is important. I think it's absolutely possible. I think that coalition existed before. I think you can build it again. But those business leaders will have to believe that it will actually work.
And Brad, is part of the conversation with business leaders the investment and the return on investment that you laid out for us, right? Talking about the, $3.2 billion investment that would be needed for the changes and the expansion that you laid out, but then what that means for our economy, what that means for money in people's pockets. And I'm curious if you think the way I do often about congestion pricing and what a powerful example that was of, some financial upfront costs for drivers in Manhattan, with an ultimate sort of economic net benefit for the city. And how do you make sort of the ROI case when you're speaking to business leaders?
Yeah, this is actually, I'll be honest, I'm thinking differently about it even just having sat here for the last little bit, because I think we could do a lot better at connecting the dots, because I don't think we let business leaders know how many families in their company are benefiting as a result of getting universal pre-K or 3K or childcare that the city is paying for. Like, that's an enormous benefit to their companies, but that's just sort of treated as like, oh, the city's covering that. And so I think there would be some intriguing things we can do to connect the dots better. Business leaders know that families are crushed with the cost. Then I think they might get pressure. And I think, the governor talked about a couple of cases where, like Micron, where she's insisted folks have a center on site. And real estate is one critical issue, so that's important. But especially in care, there'll be some need for real estate, but a lot of that will be home-based. We have to do even a little better to connect the dots and help those business leaders understand what they're getting pretty directly. So I don't know, maybe some other folks in the room are already working on this, but I think it would be fun to think about how we demonstrate broadly to business leaders where those resources are flowing and how much their workforce is being supported by this network now, but also what that will mean as we add this care. My sense in general in the business community is there is a real, okay, show me the benefit of this cost. If you're going to raise the payroll tax, if you're going to raise the corporate tax, if you're going to raise millionaires or high earners tax, what are we going to see for it? This is such a great opportunity to show them, like, this is what you're going to see, this many seats, and here's where those folks are working. The vast majority of parents who have childcare are working for employers throughout the city. So I think this is a place where, we have these kind of broad numbers of what it's doing for the city as a whole, saving in absenteeism, putting in parents' pockets, but thinking about how we directly make that case to some of our large employers is a great idea.
Any final thoughts, Rich, before we have to close?
No, I'll just repeat what was said before. What is powerful and amazing in this moment is that we are having this conversation seriously. Conversation that frankly would have felt impossible 10 or 15 years ago. Every time we deliver big results for poor and working people, we make it possible to deliver the next thing. So my context is childcare is critically important for all the reasons we described. But it's also incredibly important to make the case for public investments in housing, for public investments in mental health care, for all the things that will make this city the city that our children deserve. And so it's important to think of it in that context and to bring that energy to this fight.
Thank you. Thank you both so much.